Wishes well doing and welcome back to After They Found Atlantis. Today we're talking about ancient Athens 10,000 years ago in the time of Atlantis. Could it have been a city at that time? Mainstream archaeology says no. Now, in the dialogues, we have a lot of information about ancient Athens. Maybe we could try to find some clues in there about the city then to prove its existence.
Concerning the country, the Egyptian priests said what is not only probable but manifestly true, that the boundaries were in those days fixed by the isthmus, and that in the direction of the continent they extended as far as the heights of Cithaeron and Parnes. The boundary line came down in the direction of the sea, having the district of Oropus on the right, and with the river Asopus as the limit on the left. The land was the best in the world, and was therefore able in those days to support a vast army, raised from the surrounding people. Even the remnant of Attica which now exists may compare with any region in the world for the variety and excellence of its fruits and the suitableness of its pastures to every sort of animal, which proves what I am saying. But in those days the country was fair as now and yielded far more abundant produce. How shall I establish my words? And what part of it can be truly called a remnant of the land that then was? The whole country is only a long promontory extending far into the sea away from the rest of the continent.
The whole country is a promontory extending into the ocean from the rest of the continent. And that's exactly what we can see here with Greece. So Critias has that right. He got the geography down of Greece.
While the surrounding basin of the sea is everywhere deep in the neighborhood of the shore. Many great deluges have taken place during the 9,000 years, for that is the number of years which have elapsed since the time of which I am speaking, and during all this time and through so many changes, there has never been any considerable accumulation of the soil coming down from the mountains, as in other places, but the earth has fallen away all round and sunk out of sight. The consequence is, that in comparison of what then was, there are remaining only the bones of the wasted body, as they may be called, as in the case of small islands, all the richer and softer parts of the soil having fallen away, and the mere skeleton of the land being left. But in the primitive state of the country, its mountains were high hills covered with soil, and the plains, as they are termed by us, of Phelus were full of rich earth.
So we could see here how Greece at one time, this is 20,000 years ago according to this map, but there was a lot more soil on this land. And what Critias said is like, this is now just a skeleton of once a body that was. So all the body part had fell off, and now we have just the bones left over. And the bones are the islands right now that we see today. And a lot of it is underwater right now. So I think again, he would have to be, that would have his description about ancient Greece. I believe that sounds to me like it's pretty much on par for what we know as real history.
Now we're going to focus on the transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene as the Ice Age ends and how this impacts humans. So we have to imagine all this Arctic ice melting, and it's going to have a huge impact on the landscape around humans. It's going to cause an increase in sea levels, just as we're experiencing today as our climate warms. It's also going to cause a change in weather patterns, which we're also experiencing today. Notably, in Greece, much more rainfall, which really impacts the landscape. So let's first check out sea level rise by looking at the Cycladic Islands in the middle of the Aegean. And there's a large number of small and large islands in this region. And in the past, after 130 meters of sea level rise, we can understand that things probably looked much, much different in the past. So here's what it looked like in the past, this sort of Paleocycladic plateau. it would have been very, very different. Most of the land is now underwater. And it was much closer to the mainland, so far easier to reach. And so we've lost much of our evidence, of course, for early hunter-gatherers in the late Paleolithic and Mesolithic, because those sites are now underwater. What we think of as islands today at sea level would have actually in the past been mountain peaks and even large upland plateaus.
And there was abundance of wood in the mountains. Of this last the traces still remain, for although some of the mountains now only afford sustenance to bees, not so very long ago there were still to be seen roofs of timber cut from trees growing there, which were of a size sufficient to cover the largest houses, and there were many other high trees, cultivated by man and bearing abundance of food for cattle.
So what Critias says there is that at one time there was a lot of trees on the mountains. And there was enough to cover the roofs of the houses, of even the largest houses. So here I have Sesklo in northern Greece. It's a settlement that goes back to 7500 BC. It's pretty old. And there it looks as though they have timber, wooden roofs. So when Critias mentions something like this in times of old with the wooden houses, it could have been true. Possibly.
Moreover, the land reaped the benefit of the annual rainfall, not as now losing the water which flows off the bare earth into the sea, but, having an abundant supply in all places, and receiving it into herself and treasuring it up in the close clay soil, it let off into the hollows the streams which it absorbed from the heights, providing everywhere abundant fountains and rivers, of which there may still be observed sacred memorials in places where fountains once existed, and this proves the truth of what I am saying.
So we're looking at modern day Athens. According to Critias, in times of old there was a lot of streams, and they used to have a lot of fountains at that time. But now, in his time, the streams had dried up, but there still may be observed sacred memorials at the sites where the fountains used to be. So we need to find where water used to spring up and there's some kind of a memorial there. This is in Critias' time when he said that they were still there. It's going to be kind of hard to look through the whole city and try to find these sacred memorials, but something for us to look for and see if they're actually there. There would be along some kind of a water path. So this is where we need help. People in Athens, shout out. Go looking for those sacred memorials, please. Let us know what you find. You may not find nothing, but you may find something.
Such was the natural state of the country, which was cultivated, as we may well believe, by true husbandmen, who made husbandry their business, and were lovers of honor, and of a noble nature, and had a soil the best in the world, and abundance of water, and in the heaven above an excellently attempered climate. Now the city in those days was arranged on this wise. In the first place the Acropolis was not as now. For the fact is that a single night of excessive rain washed away the earth and laid bare the rock, at the same time there were earthquakes, and then occurred the extraordinary inundation, which was the third before the great destruction of Deucalion. But in primitive times the hill of the Acropolis extended to the Eridanus and Ilissus, and included the Pnyx on one side, and the Lycabettus as a boundary on the opposite side to the Pnyx, and was all well covered with soil, and level at the top, except in one or two places.
What Critias now is saying is that all three of these land formations were once one. But as time has gone by, now they're separated. So you have one on one side, one on the other, and the Acropolis in the middle. And it kind of looks like that could be a possibility, that these other parts of this landform right in here have washed away, and all that's left is what we have today.
Outside the Acropolis and under the sides of the hill there dwelt artisans, and such of the husbandmen as were tilling the ground near. The warrior class dwelt by themselves around the temples of Athene and Hephaestus at the summit, which moreover they had enclosed with a single fence like the garden of a single house. On the north side they had dwellings in common and had erected halls for dining in winter, and had all the buildings which they needed for their common life, besides temples, but there was no adorning of them with gold and silver, for they made no use of these for any purpose. They took a middle course between meanness and ostentation, and built modest houses in which they and their children's children grew old, and they handed them down to others who were like themselves, always the same. But in summer time they left their gardens and gymnasia and dining halls, and then the southern side of the hill was made use of by them for the same purpose. Where the Acropolis now is there was a fountain, which was choked by the earthquake, and has left only the few small streams which still exist in the vicinity, but in those days the fountain gave an abundant supply of water for all and of suitable temperature in summer and in winter.
So what Critias is saying is that where the Acropolis is now, there once was a fountain, and that fountain provided water for all those in those ancient times to drink. It was probably significant. And he also says that it had been choked off because of the earthquake, so it now no longer exists, but there are still small streams around here. Do we know that the Parthenon has moved from its original position, that there was an older Parthenon? Yes, I believe that is a fact. So here's more information along the way. Someone could find those ancient waterways, the dried up creek beds around the Parthenon, or maybe a fountain that's dried up that's maybe still there. I need your help, guys' help out there to try to find those things, and we can confirm what Critias is saying.
This is how they dwelt, being the guardians of their own citizens and the leaders of the Hellenes, who were their willing followers. And they took care to preserve the same number of men and women through all time, being so many as were required for warlike purposes, then as now, that is to say, about 20,000. Such were the ancient Athenians, and after this manner they righteously administered their own land and the rest of Hellas. They were renowned all over Europe and Asia for the beauty of their persons and for the many virtues of their souls, and of all men who lived in those days they were the most illustrious. And next, if I have not forgotten what I heard when I was a child, I will impart to you the character and origin of their adversaries. For friends should not keep their stories to themselves, but have them in common. Yet, before proceeding further in the narrative, I ought to warn you, that you must not be surprised if you should perhaps hear Hellenic names given to foreigners. I will tell you the reason of this. Solon, who was intending to use the tale for his poem, inquired into the meaning of the names, and found that the early Egyptians in writing them down had translated them into their own language, and he recovered the meaning of the several names and when copying them out again translated them into our language. My great-grandfather, Dropides, had the original writing, which is still in my possession, and was carefully studied by me when I was a child.
So Critias says that he had the original writings that he studied when he was a child. His great-grandfather Dropides or Dropides. But he had the original writing, okay? So that means, guys, in the city here, where Critias's house once was, what if they weren't digging around looking for trying to put in some electrical wiring, they end up finding this old ruin, and they discover a box that has all these papyrus in it, and one of them is original writings. They were there in Critias's time, okay? This is like 400 years before Christ, but something we could look for. I just wanted to show you guys some of the things in Athens that are provable from ancient times. A lot of what Critias is saying is actually we know is fact, and some other things we have to try to find out. And you might say, well, you know what? All these things in Critias's time or Plato's time he knew of, so he just put that into his, the fairy tale. But some of these things actually aren't, because the fact of the way that Athens or Greece has become like islands, and it once was a larger continent or larger piece of the continent. But as we know, the world has changed, and there's now it's once a skeleton of what it once was. That's why we have the islands left over. That kind of thing is like, how would somebody know this? So I just wanted to give you guys a little video today about ancient Athens. Wishes well doing. Take care, and I'll see you next time.